Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jared Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum.
IU football season is right around the corner. Led by head coach Tom Allen, the Hoosiers kick off the regular season on August 31st against the Ball State Cardinals at Lucas Oil Stadium before hosting Eastern Illinois on September the 7th in the home opener at Memorial Stadium. Visit IUHoosiers.com or text 812-855-4006 for more IU ticketing information. Go IU!
On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, we've got a two-part episode for you. First, Alex and I are going to talk for a little bit about some of the big news items that have happened since we last talked. The schedule is out. Now, Archie Miller addressed fans in Evansville, so we're going to talk about some of our takeaways from both of those. And then we have another one of our recurring guests, Adam Jardy from the Columbus Dispatch, to look ahead at the Ohio State Buckeyes for this season. A lot of hype about the Buckeyes with Kaleb Wesson returning and the third year of Chris Holtman, a big recruiting class coming in. So we're going to talk about the Buckeyes and what to expect from them with Adam Jardy, who we had on last year, and really excited to have him on again. So all of that coming this week on Podcast on the Brink. Before we get to that, a quick word about this week's sponsor, SeatGeek. Do you ever feel like ticketing websites make getting to the event difficult on purpose? It's as if they're so big, they feel like they can get away with not caring about the customer experience. So what if their site's annoying and doesn't have the events you want? Hello, status quo. The real question is, how easy could it be if those ticketing sites actually care? Well, SeatGeek does care, and that's why they're better than the rest. A quick look at the App Store shows over 50,000 five-star reviews. How's that for customer satisfaction? And the reason why customers are so satisfied is because SeatGeek delivers a better process. SeatGeek pulls together millions of tickets from all over the web. They rate each deal on a scale of 1 to 10, and they display them on an interactive seat map. Green dots mean good deals, red dots are overpriced. It's really easy for you to see at a glance. Plus, every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets with confidence. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone. It's what I use, not just for sports tickets, but also for concert tickets. They have a lot of different events there, so any type of live event that you want, SeatGeek is the place that you should go first to check for tickets, because they'll probably give you the best price there, definitely give you the best experience, and they will give you $10 off your first SeatGeek purchase. All you need to do is use our promo code. So download the SeatGeek app today, use the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, and you will get $10 off your first purchase. That's promo code BRINK for $10 off your first purchase. All right, now on with this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink. First, me and Alex, and then Adam Jardy after that. All right, Alex, so it's been a pretty eventful week since we were on here last time talking with Zach Osterman. Mike Roberts has been officially named the new head coach. We've got the schedule out. Archie Miller addressed fans in Evansville. Where do you want to start? Should we? Well, I guess let's start with Mike Roberts, because that is kind of lingering from last week. We talked about it, kind of mentioned some thoughts on that, but now we have official word that he is the coach. Any additional thoughts on the hire of Mike Roberts?
No, I mean we when we spoke last, it almost seemed like a foregone conclusion that was the direction it was headed. So I think more than anything else, just based on what Archie Miller had to say on Tuesday night in Evansville, more in the media, I don't think he addressed Mike Roberts in his 51-minute speech. But when we talked to him beforehand, some of the media that was there, the kind of the thing that stood out to me was the fact that, it didn't sound like it was the reason they hired him, that he was a former player, but that definitely resonated with Archie. The fact that he had kind of been, he mentioned, obviously being on a part of that 2002 team that went to the championship game, and then being part of a team that was not very good a couple of years later. Having those kind of different experiences, that really was something that Archie, I think, was kind of intrigued by, because he can relate to kind of what these guys some of these guys have gone through their first 2 years at IU and kind of what they aspire to be as players and part of a program. And then also just he talked about him being a grinder and his work ethic. And, we'd heard that a little bit over the last week. And just from talking to some people that know him, that was the number one thing that stood out from those conversations. And then Archie just reiterated that a little bit. So, I think when we take a step back and look at this, there's maybe some people who are underwhelmed by the decision just based on, he's not a guy with a ton of high major experience, but every coach comes up through the ranks, so to speak. It's essentially the third assistant spot. I don't know exactly who else was considered. I've heard some names, but I think all in all, it's going to be a positive addition. And if you're banking on your third assistant coach to turn your fortunes as a program or make or break your program, I don't think that says a whole lot for what you have going for yourself as a head coach or as a program. So I think he'll be fine. I think he'll, we'll hopefully get a chance to speak to him at some point just to kind of learn a little bit more about his philosophy and how he views, building a program. But overall, I think it's a fine hire, and I don't think it's, like I said, I don't think it's going to make or break the program one way or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, my initial reaction was kind of, what? Just because he, of the ex-IU players, he wasn't one that often got named. And, we had talked about, getting a known offensive guru or a guy with known recruiting connections and all this stuff, which, was probably overrated even as we were talking about it. But the more you think about it, and the more you think about the type of people that Archie is trying to build this program around and the type of mentalities, it makes a lot of sense. So I think if Archie's vision for Indiana basketball is the right one and is going to bring Indiana back, which remains to be seen, but I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that it is, having a guy like Mike Roberts will really be a good fit, and only time will tell. But I'm, in the, I guess, week now since the hire was announced, I've really come around on thinking it was a good move, in so much as you can, with an assistant coach that we don't really know the inner workings of. So let's talk about the schedule, because that finally came out. And, it's a really interesting makeup of the schedule, because November features all games at home. I think the highest ranked team Indiana will play is probably going to be Princeton. I think Princeton has a chance to be somewhere between 100 and 125. Louisiana Tech also, has a chance to be there in the hundreds. But you got a lot of other teams that, in Bart Torvik's preseason rankings project 200s, 250s, some a little bit lower. And then once December hits, boy, does the schedule turn. You've got Florida State, then your Big Ten games, begin at Wisconsin, then UConn, then Nebraska, then Notre Dame and Arkansas. So, I mean, it is a stark contrast between the November schedule and the December schedule. And then, of course, you get into, full Big Ten play. My thoughts on this are, this is not the ideal type of schedule I would like to see on a year-in, year-out basis. I think there's a little bit, maybe a few too many of those cupcakes kind of at the bottom. You're not really getting a true road experience in the non-conference. And yet, I think it's probably a pretty good schedule for this team and for the goal of getting back to the NCAA tournament, especially when you factor in the feedback, the implicit feedback that you got from the selection committee last year, where essentially for Indiana, playing that road game at Arkansas, if that game is just a home game against a 250th rated team and Indiana wins it, they might make the tournament. So I get the thinking and the strategy behind why this schedule was put together like it was, and I think it's smart for this particular season. But I think, like all Indiana fans, and like Archie, I think too, you'd love to see Kentucky back on it. You'd love to get Louisville back on the schedule. You'd love to see some more marquee games. But you also do kind of need a team and a program that's at the point to handle those. And as much as we'd like to be, we're not there yet. So I like this schedule as hopefully a stepping stone from year 3 to year 4, where year 4 we're able to handle more. But for this season, it seems like it's set up pretty smartly. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. The only thing I look at is that first month and what are they actually going to get out of it. They're probably going to get 7 wins out of it, which I guess is going to mean something in terms of trying to build a resume. But are those? It's kind of like, to me, a lot of empty calories. But at the same time, I agree with what you said. If they hadn't have scheduled at Arkansas last year, they'll probably make the tournament.
Or if that tip-in just goes in.
Right.
Dang it.
I mean, the interesting thing to me will be, say they are able to start 7-0, and who knows what will happen with the Florida State game, but going to Wisconsin for your first true road game.
Yeah, I mean, that's rough.
Ever won, and I mean, they've obviously won there, but I don't remember exactly. We've talked about this before. The last time they won in Madison, it's been 20 years almost, something like that.
Something like that.
So that'll be interesting. And then, as much as you look at December and you're like, wow, they're playing all high major opponents. You look after Wisconsin. I mean, obviously Florida State, I think in Wisconsin is going to be tough, but then UConn, neutral court. I mean, if you're going to be a tournament team, that's probably a game you need to get. UConn wasn't very good last year, and they're, projected similarly to IU and Bart Torvik, Nebraska at home, then Notre Dame and Indy, which I think is kind of a chance for your marquee win, and then Arkansas at home. I mean, they have a chance. I mean, if this team's going to be a tournament team, I think you have to come into that game at Maryland with only 2 or 3 losses at the most. Any more than that, and I don't necessarily think you're feeling all that great about the trajectory of your season. So they've definitely set themselves up to get a lot of wins, and maybe starting out a little bit slower in terms of the intensity of the schedule can help some of these young guys get a little bit more a chance to get acclimated. I think that was one thing that was missing last season. They had a lot of games early on where when we would have talked about it before the season, we looked at those games and said, hey, this is a chance for the young guys to maybe get some minutes, and it just never came to fruition. I mean, that stretch there where they played, I think it was like UC Davis maybe and UT Arlington. I don't remember all the names, but there was a bunch of games that were closer than expected. Whereas this year's schedule, it feels like in November they're going to be able to get, Armand Franklin, Trace Jackson Davis, Demezy Anderson, the guys that I think are going to have to kind of come through and be reliable contributors. They're going to have a chance to get some confidence to get their legs under them. So I like it from that perspective. But I still think, they're going to have to have a really strong Big Ten season, because I just don't see the strength of schedule in the non-conference being you would expect from a team that's going to try to get an at-large bid. So all in all, I think it was well put together. I'm sure there's some science behind the RPI and the net and all that, that I'm not smart enough to know how they set it all up, but I think it's a fine schedule.
Yeah, you mentioned that November sequence and it kind of being empty calories, and that is true to a certain extent, but I thought your point was an important one about working some young guys in, and you've got a lot of guys who are just going to be in new roles. Like if you gave this schedule to the 2013 team, where you're returning a veteran team, guys are in the same roles, and they're ready to roll from day one, it would be a complete waste of everybody's time. In this case, I think, think about if Jerome Hunter, if he's able to come back and play, boy, it sure would be nice to, allow him to get his basketball sea legs again after missing a full season, against some teams that aren't, just going to be killers out there. So, I like it from that perspective. Obviously, Indiana needs to win all of those games. They've got to get guys experience. A lot of things need to happen for it to be worth it. But, we'll see when it unfolds. But I think just, kind of peering out into the future and what you kind of think that this team needs and what will help set them up to get into the NCAA tournament. Because, my goodness, I mean, and Archie knows this better than anybody. They have to find a way to make the NCAA tournament this year. And if that means you just rack up some wins, fine. Like, just get in the NCAA tournament. I think the schedule can help them. But now, they've still got to bring it and come out ready to play, even, from November to make it worth it. So we're going to talk with Adam Jardy here in just a little bit, talk about the Ohio State Buckeyes. Before we get to that, though, one more topic that I want to talk with you about. Archie Miller addressed fans, addressed the media in Evansville. We don't get to hear from Archie a lot, so it's always really interesting when he does talk. I'm curious, and he talked for a while, so we can't cover everything, but I'm curious what really jumped out to you that he said, and maybe where we should start is the Jerome Hunter comments, because I think those were the comments that everybody paid the most attention to. And correct me if I'm wrong, was there anything new? Because I think Jerome Hunter had been cleared for activity before. It was nothing about him being cleared for games. It was cleared for activity and participation. So it's always exciting when you hear good news, and it did seem like there have been some optimistic developments, but it's not. Jerome has not yet been cleared to play in games. Is that the right way to interpret what Archie said?
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously trending in a positive direction. However, when he said fully cleared, I think maybe some people misinterpreted that as, he's going to play like right away in this season. And I don't necessarily know that that's a realistic expectation. I'm not saying that he won't play, but I just didn't. It was obvious that he was a little bit more open in what he said about him, and the possibility that he will be able to return to the court. But I didn't necessarily view that as a huge bombshell or anything. The one thing that also stood out when he talked about recruiting, he mentioned this class could potentially, back at the Hubers talk in late May, he said 4 players, and last night he said 4 to 6. So this recruiting class may be a little bit larger than we had originally anticipated. That was an interesting tidbit, but obviously,
is that anything to read into, or is that a reflection of the reality of college basketball, where guys transfer, guys go pro, and you just need to because some people have reacted to that, like, oh man, is he expecting certain people to leave? Like that didn't seem like anything more to me than this is what college basketball is, and we want to be ready.
Yeah, I mean, I just think there's enough guys out there that they're in on and that they're recruiting that if they can get the right guys, that they would try to take that many. I don't necessarily think he was saying we're going to take 6 for sure. We're going to take 5 or 4. I just think he was kind of giving a range. But, overall, it was, maybe the thing that stood out to me the most was just how comfortable he seemed in the setting. I mean, I've watched him now. This is probably the 3rd or 4th time I've watched him speak in a public setting, and I'm not saying he's ever looked like he's been. I'm talking to fans because obviously I've seen him in press conferences and at Hoosier Hysteria, but this is a little bit different kind of setting. He just seemed pretty relaxed, and
well, he had just gotten done hanging out with Victor Oladipo for a weekend, so the swag rubbed off.
I mean, the funny comment, about the being able to shoot better than, he told some of the players, he said, made a joke, and I'm paraphrasing here, but I would definitely encourage you to watch the full video. But he joked about not telling the players last year he didn't really understand why they couldn't make shots. He basically said, when I was there, I just shot it and it went in. I don't really know what your guys' problem is. I mean, I could probably beat most of you right now in these suit pants and coat. So it was, a little bit different vibe than, he's always so intense and always so businesslike and focused at all times. And, it was just a little bit different than what we're used to from him, which I just think to me, it says that he's just becoming more ingrained in, his role and comfortable in his shoes. I mean, I'm sure it's obviously a huge adjustment coming from Dayton to Indiana as the head coach. It's just a lot more scrutiny, a lot more eyeballs, a lot more people want to take pictures with you and get your autograph. There was a huge line afterwards, people taking selfies and getting autographs, and he obviously does all those things. So, it's a good event. I kind of wish they did more of these type of things around the state, just to kind of, draw in different pockets of the state. And I'm sure in future classes, if there's a recruit from, say, Fort Wayne that they're looking for, and there's an opportunity to go speak up there, they'll do things like that. It was obviously, some of his comments were, I love Evansville. I mean, we all know who he's talking about there. So that was another thing that kind of
dropping hints like he did with Romeo when he took over. I know where New Albany is.
For sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I got the sense, I mean, he said he liked this team, and coaches say that a lot. They always, football coaches especially, I like my team. I like how things are going. But, he talked a lot about humility and leadership. Those were kind of two things that also stood out to me. It just felt pretty genuine what he said about this team and guys, it felt like if they can all come together in terms of embracing their roles and realizing what they need to do on a day-to-day basis, he feels like this could be a pretty successful season. So I think if you're an IU fan, you have to be encouraged by that as well.
A couple of the things that I thought were interesting, and not surprisingly, but he said offensively, Indiana's going to play a little bit of a unique style, going inside. And why wouldn't you? I mean, that's a big strength for this team. It's going to be kind of a place where Indiana can zag a little bit while other teams are zigging. And I'm sure at times it's, it'll hurt Indiana in games, but it's also a place where they can really take advantage with the size and the versatility that they have down low. So that wasn't surprising. One thing I was encouraged to hear is he mentioned that, he mentioned that Al Durham has really been working as kind of the backup point guard. And this has been kind of a lingering question for me. I mean, I think we all hope that Rob Phinisee can play point guard 40 minutes a game. That's unrealistic. So when he's out, who's going to take over the primary ball handling duties? And it's not that I think point guard is Al's strength. I mean, I think he's better in, kind of that combo guard, two guard, secondary playmaking type role. But I think we certainly have enough evidence to know that Devontae Green playing off the ball, being able to focus on scoring, not having to be the primary guy to get you into the offense, that is where he thrives. And so allowing Al to be that guy, and Al makes good decisions, doesn't turn it over a ton, he handles the ball well in the pick and roll, makes good decisions. I think that's smart, and I think that will allow Devontae to really flourish as a senior. So I continue to be more and more bullish on what Devontae can do this season, because it really seems like Archie is setting things up to really put him in a position to succeed and to know what his role is and just to be able to go out and do it. And I don't think he's had that for 3 years, and I think he's a guy who could really thrive in it. So I was encouraged to hear that, because I think that's a good way to utilize those guys.
No doubt. All astute observations, Jared, as usual.
Any other observations before we shut this down and bring on Adam to talk about the Buckeyes?
The only other thing that really comes to mind now as I kind of think back, the other thing, Armaan Franklin, he mentioned him quite a bit in a favorable light and said that he's going to contribute this year. So that kind of
he has to
leads to my whole, people have asked me, is Armaan going to be more Demezy type impact or Rob Phinisee? And while I'm not willing to say Rob Phinisee type impact, I would shade him more in that category than I would a guy who's maybe not going to play or play sparingly as a freshman. So I think Armaan Franklin is going to be a really good player for 3 or 4 years in Bloomington. I think right now we're talking a lot about these guys, Rob Phinisee, Al Durham, and Devontae Green, and I think those guys are obviously going to get the first crack at playing guard minutes. But I think there's going to be some moments this year where Armaan Franklin comes up big for Indiana. I just get that feeling from watching his development over the last year. And I think what he brings from a shooting perspective, if he can make shots, even a 35-40% clip from three, he's right away a big contributor on this team. So
I think he can be like what Remy Abel was his first couple of years. That kind of, playing 6 to 8 minutes, something like that, knocking down some shots. I mean, you think back to when Indiana finally, won that game at Purdue. Remy Abel was huge, made some big shots.
Right. And
I could see Armaan having a couple moments like that, because I think
sure.
he's going to step on the court, pretty mature physically, obviously mature mentally, for a freshman. And so he's going to be inconsistent like all freshmen, but he's going to get opportunities because we only have 4 guards. So
he's been coached
he will
really
play.
Well too. I think that's the other thing that kind of stands out when you think about his high school career. He was coached really well at Cathedral. I think is his aunt that was the coach at Penn State, the women's coach, I believe.
Yes, I believe so.
So he's been around.
Yep.
Basketball at high levels, and he'll be ready to go, I think, from day one.
All right, let's go talk about all IU fans' favorite subject, the Ohio State Buckeyes, with Adam Jardy. That's coming up next. All right, and we are pleased now to bring in on this episode of Podcast on the Brink, Adam Jardy, who covers the Ohio State Buckeyes basketball team for the Columbus Dispatch. Adam, to begin, I just want to make sure, are we allowed to use the word "the" in this podcast? Talking about Ohio State, do we need to pay licenses? I don't want to get in trouble here.
As long as you're not trying to sell merchandise that's scarlet and gray that says "the," then you're good.
Okay.
But that's what they're trying to protect.
Okay, gotcha. Just wanted to make sure that we were all in the clear. So we want to talk about the Ohio State Buckeyes, obviously, looking ahead to next season. There is a lot of hype for this team. Kaleb Wesson's back, big recruiting class coming in. Maybe let's just start from kind of the 30,000-foot view before we zoom in and talk about some of the individual guys. What do you think of the high expectations for Ohio State, and do you think that Chris Holtmann has a roster and personnel that is going to be able to live up to him?
From a very broad viewpoint, yes, I do. I think you're seeing that Chris Holtmann is building the program the way that he wants to build it. They've made the conscious decision to do it by going young. And so you had, a big freshman class last year with 4 guys. 3 of them are still there. You have a 4-member freshman class this year. They still only have 1 actual senior on the roster. And so I think what's exciting for Ohio State fans and why I think they're going to make a step forward this year in the Big Ten is that they're young, but they're not the youngest team. And this core group of guys could still potentially almost exclusively be together next year as well. So I think that there's a definite feeling right now that this is a program that's on the upswing and that they're bringing in talent that is going to mature and develop. And I think I'm not saying that like they're a Final Four team this year. I think they're probably like a Sweet 16 team this year. And I think that if a few things fall into place, I think they're a year away from potentially being a Final Four caliber team.
That's interesting that you mention a year away, because that's kind of what I've been thinking when I look at Ohio State. And, you'll forgive Indiana fans if, when we look at what Ohio State lost in CJ Jackson and Keyshawn Woods, to us, those are like, you're losing 2, first team all Big Ten guards who were seniors because they played so well against Indiana. But how much? Ohio State is going to miss those guys, aren't they? They were, seniors, experienced guys that really, played well in some big moments. How much of a transition do you think it'll be now? Moving a guy like Luther Muhammad into a different role, bringing in some of the freshmen. How much are they going to miss those seniors?
Well, it's an interesting question because when you mention like Indiana fans being mad at Ohio State and CJ Jackson, well, they're going to replace him with CJ Walker, who's an Indianapolis kid. So
that's
maybe
right. Is he the transfer from? He's a transfer, right?
From Florida State.
That's right.
Yeah. He went to Florida State for 2 years and ultimately lost his starting job like toward the end of that sophomore year and decided to transfer. Chris Holtmann really likes having traditional transfers. He likes having a guy come in who can provide some veteran presence, who is going to spend a year learning the system and then assume a big role when he becomes eligible. So I think CJ Walker steps in for CJ Jackson. I don't want to say seamlessly, but I don't think there's going to be too much of a drop off there because you're going to have a guy who's played 2 years in the ACC and has played and scored at a high level. I don't think he's going to be a go-to scorer or anything like that, like they needed CJ Jackson to be occasionally, but I think he's probably maybe arguably the biggest leader on this team. I think he's a very mature kid who has his, sort of his head in the right direction. So I think, yes, they'll miss CJ Jackson, but I think CJ Walker can fulfill a lot of those things that CJ Jackson did. Keyshawn is an interesting one because he played so well at the end of the season. Like that team does not make the tournament if he doesn't basically carry them for like the last 7 or 8 games of his career. He just played out of his mind, and he played at the level that we kept thinking he was going to play because he had played 4 years of Division I basketball. He really didn't find his form. He didn't really find his footing until Kaleb Wesson got suspended, and then someone had to start stepping up, and he really took it on his shoulders there. I think anytime you lose a guy that has that kind of experience and that has shown that he could turn it on, those are hard things to replace. But I think that with the talent that they have in this recruiting class, I think a DJ Carton really helps sort of mitigate some of those losses. And overall, I just think that for losing 2 guys who had played so many games and were so established, I don't really expect there to be too much of a drop off from the guard position this year.
Adam, you mentioned DJ Carton, and he was actually the first guy I wanted to ask you about. And you also talked a little bit about CJ Walker. How do you think those two are going to coexist? Because on one hand, you have a guy who obviously CJ Walker is going to expect to play. He's coming with a lot of experience. He's the older guy, but DJ Carton is a top 35 recruit who, Ohio State won a pretty fierce battle with Michigan and Indiana to get him, and I'm sure that he's going to want minutes as well coming in as a freshman. How do you kind of envision those two their roles? Do you feel like Walker, I guess, has the leg up at least coming into the season, and how do you see that all playing out?
I see them coexisting very well. Ohio State has shown under Holtman that they'll play three guards. They'll play 2 point guards on the floor at the same time. I almost feel like anymore with the way college basketball continues to develop, and you have guys playing multiple positions. Like you could have another ball handler on the floor. I think that's a definite plus, and so I think that you'll see both CJ and DJ on the court at the same time. I think you'll see that probably a fair amount, because then you still have Luther Muhammad and Dwayne Washington as guards to help, give minutes and play significant roles. I feel like just my personal take right now is that I think that CJ Walker maybe starts the year as a starter and DJ Carton comes off the bench. Chris Holtman is notoriously tough on his point guards. It's been a well-established sort of quirk of his coaching style, and if you talk to anybody who played the point for him, they will tell you that he focuses more on that position than any other position. So I think that when I look at it that way, that you maybe go with a DJ Carton, you go with CJ Walker right off the bat, because I think you probably have another freshman in the starting lineup. I don't know if you boot Luther Muhammad out of the starting lineup. I think he probably needs to be a starter. So to me, if you're looking at like starting a sophomore in Luther Muhammad, and you probably a freshman in EJ Liddell, I think you probably go with a little bit more experience off the bat until DJ gets his feet underneath him. So my expectation right now is you see CJ Walker start and DJ Carton come off the bench, because someone has to come off the bench. But Holtman likes his impact subs. He likes guys that can sub in and give him offense and give him things, give him a spark, and could be a really good role for DJ Carton. So maybe that's what we ultimately end up seeing here as the season gets started.
I'm a little bit more, I guess, bullish on Ohio State, I think, than most people. I did a preseason Big Ten power rankings a couple weeks ago, and I actually had Ohio State second ahead of Maryland. But do you, best case scenario is, do you feel like Ohio State has the personnel to, I think we can all agree that Michigan State is the class of the league, the heavy favorite,
Sure.
Maybe the biggest favorite to win the league since maybe that season that Wisconsin had Frank Kaminsky and Sam Decker and those guys. I think they finished 16-2 that year, but they were a pretty clear-cut favorite. But beyond that, to me, it feels pretty wide open. Do you feel like Ohio State has the capability to be the team maybe right there after Michigan State in the league?
I do, and some of that, I mean, obviously, I think most people are going to put Maryland right there at number 2, and there's a very good argument to be made for that. And I'm certainly not discounting everything that they bring back. But I've never been 100% blown away by Mark Turgeon, and I've always got the impression that I always feel like they come in with certain levels of expectations and they struggle to reach them or meet them. And I don't know if that's a culture thing, I don't know if that's a coaching thing or a personnel thing, but anytime I'm always, whatever I think everyone thinks Maryland is going to be, I usually move them down like a spot or two, because I just feel like they never get to there. So to me, then if you start talking about who is that second best team in the Big Ten, where could Ohio State fit into that picture? I absolutely think that that's a possibility. Like, for example, they don't go to Purdue this year. Now they do have to go to Michigan State, but the schedule isn't it's not completely daunting for them as far as the conference slate, who they play at home and who they play on the road. And when you look at, honestly, I just feel like when you look at a roster and a coaching staff that has in 2 years done way more than any of us thought they were going to do. I think there's a track record now, or there's a little bit of a book out now on Chris Holtman, in that he is getting the most out of his teams and probably a little bit more. So when you take a team that, frankly, for a good portion of the season last year looked like it had no business making the NCAA tournament, it makes a tournament, it wins a game, and you bring back so much of that team, some of which was on the team 2 years ago that almost won the Big Ten out of nowhere. He has a knack, he has an ability to get the most out of his players, which makes me think when you have a roster that has a really talented sophomore class that played significant roles last season, and you complement that with some guys who I really think can be impact freshmen, and you have some experienced leadership and an Andre Weston as a senior and a potential all Big Ten player in Kaleb Wesson, there's a lot to like about what Ohio State brings to the table. Now, they need guys to step into bigger roles. You need some guys to improve their production. You can't have Luther Muhammad, his offense, fall off like it did last year. You need Dwayne Washington to be more efficient. And you need a lot of things from a lot of guys. But certainly, if you put them second, third, fourth, I don't think any of that is out of the question or a crazy take on where their season could end up.
Let's talk for a minute about Kaleb Wesson. It was obviously good news for Ohio State when he came back. I think he'll be, on everybody's all Big Ten team preseason. Man, looking at his numbers, he was better actually last year than I thought. I mean, this is a guy who used almost 30% of possessions when he was on the court. So, Ohio State's offense really revolved around him when he was out there. Had a good block percentage, a good steal percentage. He made 34.7% of his threes, drew a lot of fouls. Do you think he has another level that he can go to? And is it one of those things where conditioning is going to kind of dictate whether he reaches that level? Or is there, a particular skill or something that he's really working on that you think could help him go to the next level?
I think if there is another level for him to reach, that it will come by just staying on the court. It was such a big issue for Ohio State last year with him being in foul trouble. And when he was out of the game, the coaching staff talks a lot about how many guys do you have that, the other team, when they're making a scouting report, that they circle. And last season, the only guy was Kaleb Wesson. Other guys could chip in here and there, and guys did, but teams were focusing on Kaleb Wesson straight up. And so that obviously created issues for him. And then once you start getting into foul trouble, it's easy. You look at those statistics and you think, man, that was a really impactful season. And it was, but he needs to find ways to stay on the court longer and for more extended stretches of time. If he can do that, then I do think there's potential for bigger numbers, for a bigger impact. I'll be interested to see if ultimately he doesn't need to have a bigger impact because maybe there's more guys stepping up who are capable of shouldering some of that, not the blame, shouldering some of the load, just guys that you can lean on to get a bucket down the stretch. So I think that you could see him potentially be more impactful, but the numbers stay roughly the same because he's just doing it more efficiently and other guys are chipping in. His conditioning is always going to be a talking point. We actually had interviews with Chris Holtman yesterday, and he confirmed what we saw. Kaleb played in a summer league here called the Kingdom Summer League in Columbus, and kind of a neat thing. We got to see a handful of the guys, kind of what they look like and what they were working on during the summer. It's basically organized open gym, but it was still, some element of competitive basketball, and he's in the best shape of his life. I mean, he looks like a power forward. He doesn't look like a center. He looks trimmed down. He looks quick. If he can maintain that through the course of the Big Ten season, that you can't overstate what that would do. It's really hard for him, it seems, to keep up that level of conditioning for a long, long period of time, like through the season, where you're already practicing hard and working hard, and then you have to do more conditioning on top of that. That's a hard sell, and that's a hard thing to recognize and realize as a player that that's a necessity. But I think if he can stay on top of that, and like I said, stay out of foul trouble, I think he's a first-team All-Big Ten player. He's got to realize those things and learn to control those things.
What do you expect from Ohio State stylistically on offense? Obviously when Wesson is in the game, things are going to run through him. And, I look at, for example, what Indiana's going to have this year. And, Deron Davis is a guy who, when he's healthy is really good. And now Indiana, brought in some backup help there with Joey Brunk. And so they'll probably always be playing with a big man on the court. For Ohio State, what kind of depth do they have behind Wesson? And do you foresee, the offense being drastically different when he's on and off the court?
I think it will have to be because essentially the depth that they have behind him is a 7-foot freshman that they brought in who's about as raw as they come. His name's Ibrahima Diallo. He played out in California at Prolific Prep for his senior season. He's an overseas kid. Like they say, you can't coach 7 foot. So he brings some physical things to the court that just, if you put him on the floor, theoretically, he can just stand there and be a presence for, a couple of minutes a game. But I mean, he's a potential redshirt candidate. I mean, he's that raw. So, he's the obvious size-wise backup for Kaleb Wesson. And then you kind of go down the roster and you've got some guys that are a little bit undersized, but guys that could potentially fill in, whether it's, we saw Kyle Young play there at times last season. Andre Wesson, his Caleb's older brother, can play some 5 if he has to. Some of the freshmen, I think, and Alonzo Gaffney or EJ Liddell, if they're physically ready, maybe those guys can help when you go, spread the court a little bit and play some smaller ball. Stylistically, I mean, I think they're going to look in some ways a lot similar to what they did last year. I think they have a few more weapons because I think Carton can score, and I think that EJ Liddell can score. So you have a few more few more weapons in the arsenal, but so much of what they're going to do is still going to sort of focus around Kaleb Wesson and making sure that he's the focal point, because he's still their best player until someone else proves otherwise.
Adam, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit, but I've looked at the Big Ten as a whole this year, and I feel pretty good about Michigan State, Ohio State, and Maryland as three teams that I think are going to be pretty good. Michigan State obviously is going to be good, and I feel pretty good about Ohio State and Maryland. After that, it's very wide open in my opinion. The next group of teams to me: Purdue, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin. Out of those teams, do any of those jump out at you as a team that you feel pretty confident is going to make the tournament? A lot of people were talking about Illinois, and then I look at what they did down the stretch last season. They were 2-6 their last 8 games, and their 2 wins were over Northwestern. So I almost feel like a lot of people are kind of jumping the gun on them a little bit. Wisconsin, Ethan Happ's gone. Michigan lost their coach. Purdue, I think they deserve the benefit of the doubt to an extent, but they also lost Carson Edwards, who is arguably the best guard in college basketball last year. So any of those teams particularly intriguing to you? Do you feel good about any of those teams, or is this really wide open in the middle?
I like your point about Purdue. I think that you have to give them the benefit of the doubt based on what Matt Painter continues to do there. And I know that might be hard for people that listen to your podcast regularly to hear, but I think what he's done and what they continue to do, at this point, I don't know that I'm ever going to count them out necessarily. So I think they're definitely in the mix. I'm intrigued by Wisconsin based on what they bring back. And yes, you lose Ethan Happ, but hear me out on this. For everything that Ethan Happ did, for all the numbers that he put up, I never really liked him that much as a player. And I know that sounds weird or crazy or whatever, but I just felt like he could only do 1 or 2 things on the court. And he could do them possibly better than anybody that's ever played at Wisconsin. And I'm not discounting that. I'm not discounting the impact that he made. But I felt like he was such a limited player. And when you have a guy like that who's going into his 4th year, who has been such a major part of what you've been building and how you want to play, it really forced everybody to play off of that and to assume roles that complement that. And I feel like that stunts guys occasionally. And that's I'm not saying take the minutes away from the all-time program greats and give them to this kid. But I'm saying that I feel like when you don't have that presence anymore, I think guys can relish that and can seize that and can grow into bigger, better players. So I think Wisconsin, even though they're losing him, I think Wisconsin's going to be better. So I think they're a team that's certainly in that running there. I don't know about Michigan. We just don't know what they're going to look like. I don't know how good of a coach is Juwan Howard going to be. I mean, I think we have maybe an idea, but I have no idea. I don't know where they fit into it. I agree with you on Illinois, although I do feel like with Ayo Dosunmu, he's one of my favorite players to watch in the Big Ten, and I think when he's playing at a high level, it's hard to count against them. The team I'm oddly intrigued by is Penn State. Just the way that they really kind of came back from the brink last year and rallied around Pat Chambers. And I mean, even when you think about all the things that they went through last year with guys getting suspended and Pat Chambers getting suspended, and to play the way that they did, by the end of the season, nobody wanted to play them. And I know that's sort of always, it's too little too late for Penn State. And that's kind of how it tends to go at that program. But if they can carry some of that over into this year and just get a few non-conference wins, I mean, I think they could be a dangerous team. So yeah, it's going to be that sort of middle there, the Big Ten. It's going to be fascinating. I mean, I know we're sitting here, we're not even into September yet, but I'm like, give me some conference games. Like, I want to know what Illinois is going to look like. I want to know what Penn State's going to look like. I don't care about Northwestern because I know they're going to be at the bottom, but or even when we haven't even talked about Rutgers, Pikel's building something there, and there's a belief in that program. And I mean, is Rutgers going to make the NCAA tournament this year? I don't know that. I'm not sure if I'm going to go that far, but some of these teams that, for the last several years, you just wrote off Penn State, you wrote off Illinois, you wrote off Rutgers. Those guys just occupy the bottom of the standings. I'm not writing any of those teams off this year.
Adam, Alex hung up 4 minutes ago when you insulted Ethan Happ. He's not going to have that. So it'll be you and me for the rest of the conversation.
Hey, I'm calling Bart Torvik right now and reporting this. So
I just want to say that I agree with Adam's take on that.
I was a big Ethan Happ fan, but I do agree with a lot of what Adam said in that when you have one player who is the focal point of everything, it can suppress the talents of other guys. With Wisconsin specifically, I think they need Nate. I don't want to mispronounce his last name, but Reavers or whatever. Yeah, Reavers. Yeah, I think he's going to have to come up in a big way this season. But they do have some guys in Demetric Trice, obviously Brad Davison, the intriguing guys, and just their. I feel like Wisconsin's never going to be that bottom of the barrel Big Ten team just because of their style being so unique and not turning the ball over and limiting possessions. It's just hard to get away from them in a game unless you're really just clicking on all cylinders. It feels like they can hang around against anybody, and so that's a credit to their style and how well coached they are. But
and one more thing I want to interject about Happ too is that in my book, no matter how good of a player you are, no matter how many things you can do, if you are a liability on the court for the last couple of minutes of a game, if they have to take you out of the game because you can't make a free throw, and I realize that was Shaq's problem 100 years ago, but if you're a college player and that has been your problem for 4 years and you can't figure it out to where they have to remove you from a close game because you're a liability, to me that's a huge knock. So I'm just throwing that out there too.
Totally fair.
Yep. So, one team that we haven't really spent much time talking about is Indiana, which we should before we get off here. When you last saw Indiana, Adam, they were not playing particularly well in a Big Ten tournament loss to Ohio State, but Devontae Green was making 3-pointers from literally everywhere on the court.
Yes.
What are your, lingering thoughts of Indiana from last year? And then as you project the Hoosiers forward, where do you kind of see them in the Big Ten hierarchy, and which individual players are you most intrigued by?
I'm most intrigued by Jerome Hunter. I mean, that's a kid from in my backyard here. I mean, I saw him play in high school, and there's the mystery that has surrounded him basically since his arrival at Indiana. Because he was a top 35, top 40 recruit. I think that last year, if they have Jerome Hunter and he's healthy, they probably make the tournament, right? I mean, that gives them a significant option that I think. So to me, that's my question mark. Is I feel like it's so easy to forget what a player he is and what his potential is. So to me, if he's healthy and if he's what he has been projected to be, I mean, that's a huge boost for Indiana. And if he's not, then I think you really have to start to worry about his future and about what that means. And I have no inside information on that. I have no idea what his situation is, but I really hope that he can get on the court and be that player that we all know that he can be, because Indiana needs that. I mean, that's what they brought him in for. So it's easy to overlook that, I feel like, over the course of a season where, you go through what you went through if you're Indiana last year, and, all the hype and all the buzz and not fulfilling that potential. Missing a guy like that kind of, at least from where I'm sitting, didn't get talked about enough. The problem with all that is that now, you've gone through, 2 years with Arch, and you haven't gotten to where you were projected to get. And I mean, all that I could see and all that I could hear is there doesn't seem to be much in the way of chemistry and unity and things on that team last year. So you have to wonder if they can get some of that straightened out. And there's always winning always helps with that. So, maybe they get off to a really good start this year and they don't have those kinds of issues. But to me, it's Indiana. You recruit well, you have good players, you got to make it work. And so in year 3 under Arch, I'm expecting that they need to take a step forward on some of those things. And so I don't know that they have challenged Michigan State for a title, although they obviously had their number last year. I don't know if I don't think they're there yet. And I'm interested to see where. I feel like this season is going to tell us a lot as far as the barometer of that program and whether Archie is up for it. Because, I mean, like I said, they're bringing in talented players. I'm just interested to see if it fits, and I'm interested to see if they can find a way to get out of this. And almost from the distance, it just feels like a malaise almost. That, like, there's not that fire to go out there and be that team and go, make a run at the Big Ten. Like, I mean, Indiana and Ohio State were in very interesting positions when they made their coaching hires 2 years ago, and just to see how Chris Holtmann has been able to galvanize what he had and get the most out of it, whereas it's been this sort of slog through a rebuild at Indiana, is just fascinating to me. And I'm very interested this year to see if we start seeing some progress on that and start seeing them dig their way out.
That's well said. It's depressing to listen to, but it's pretty well said right there, I would say. So I need to ask you another question because we don't want to end on that note. but I think you make a lot of really good points. You really do. And I think, Alex and I have talked about it here. I mean, this is a really, really important season for Archie. It does feel like a lot of the decisions that he's made, this offseason and since last season have been with an eye toward, better leadership, better chemistry, more toughness, all of those things that were really lacking last year. But, we won't know until the season starts. So hopefully those things are better. Last question for you, just, kind of another general Big Ten question. What player or players are you really intrigued to see around the conference this year? Maybe young guys that you really are intrigued to see if they kind of make that jump, experienced guys that are going to be in new roles. Who are the players that you really have your eye on?
Like Io DeSumo from Illinois is at the top of that list for me. I just think that he really came on last year. And when I think about what it was like, I mean, Ohio State played them in December, and then they played them in like mid-February. And the growth from that, just from him specifically, and just seeing what he was by the time they met for a second time, like he's a fascinating player to me. And I think he's a superstar. I think he's in the NBA next year. So I'm really interested to see where he goes. I'm interested to see like a Lamar Stevens at Penn State. And again, here we are talking about Penn State in August. I mean, it's mass hysteria on this podcast right now, but I feel like they've got some pieces there. And I think he's just such a fascinating player. Maybe it's because he's done so well against Ohio State in the time that they've played, but like, I'm very interested to see him. Just starting at the top, like Cassius Winston, like what does he look like as a senior and now taking on, being the guy and the unquestioned guy, and how does he handle all of that? Or even, you go over to Michigan, you think of Xavier Simpson, and I mean, he was amazing watching him against Ohio State last year. He had a triple double and talked so much about how much it meant to him to play like that against Ohio State as a senior, and as the guy who's going to run the program for Juwan. Like, how do they sort of harness that? I felt like Beeline at times did a really good job of taking the somewhat of a limited skill set, but a great mindset and getting the most out of him. How does that translate to Michigan? How does that translate to Juwan Howard, how he wants him to play? So I'm very interested to see how he handles that. You go down the list at Wisconsin, like what does a Brad Davison look like, or a Demetric Trice look like this year without an Ethan Happ there to take, so much of the attention? Those are a couple guys just immediately off the top of my head. As I sit here right now, maybe Matt Harms at Purdue. Like, what does he look like this year? And I'll put Jerome Hunter at the top of that list too. If he can play, I really want to see a Jerome Hunter healthy and firing on all cylinders, and what that looks like, because I know he means a lot to Central Ohio, and even though he is playing for Indiana, and that's always going to stick with people, they want to see him do well, and I do too. He's a nice kid, and I enjoyed when I got to cover his recruitment. So he's right up there as well. What does he look like? Oh man,
all Indiana fans are with you. I can't imagine the ovation that kid will get if he is able to make his first entry into a game. It'll be well deserved, and I sure hope it comes this season. I mean, as obviously I want it for Indiana because it means a lot for Indiana, but just for him, he's worked so hard. I want to see him get back on the court.
Yeah, and then tell us what happened. What has happened the last year? Like, I'm interested in the story too. Like, yeah. Why are we where we are? But hopefully we'll get all those answers eventually.
I think another guy that's interesting, just in terms of swinging the potential of a team pretty dramatically, is Jordan Bohannon. Is he going to play? Is he going to redshirt? I think if he redshirts, then Iowa's potentially not a turn. I think they're a bottom 5 or 6 Big Ten team without him. But if he plays and plays at the level that he showed last year down the stretch, I mean, some of those games against Indiana, he was just unstoppable. And he had some other performances, but they're a team that I feel like if they have him, along with Joe Wieskamp, who's probably my pick for breakout player in the Big Ten next season, and Luka Garza, who I think is a really good, solid post player. I think Iowa's a team that has a lot of pieces, but they need, I think, Jordan Bohannon to reach their full potential. And if he can't play, I think that kind of puts a spot up for grabs in the middle of the pack that wouldn't otherwise be there.
Yeah, and I'm excited. I think I still don't know how to say his last name correctly because I'm just used to writing it. But Georgie over at Illinois, I mean, I think he's like a future like Big Ten star. I mean, he's got the personality, he's got the game. I think he's a guy that, like, even if you don't care about basketball, I think he's a guy you can really latch onto. So I want to watch him this year too. I want to see how he embraces that and continues to sort of grow as this great personality and player at the same time.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd like to see how Illinois is going to play defensively this year, because last year some of the stuff that I don't know if you follow Big Ten Geeks on Twitter, but it got comical. Like later in the season, just kind of some of the stuff they were doing defensively, like just letting teams drive for uncontested layups, and
like what Indiana did to them.
Yeah, exactly. The Indiana game there late in the season. That's the thing I can't get out of my head. You know, I've seen some of these projections with Illinois as a top 10 team, and I'm like, Did people watch the game last year late in Champaign when Indiana just came in there and destroyed them? And I'm just like, are they going to make huge adjustments? I think I agree with, you know, the premise that they can make a leap forward and that they have some talent. I just, you know, just how bad, you know, they were bad last year. So it's a pretty big leap for them to make be a top 3 or 4 Big Ten team. I think is a pretty big leap.
I agree. And the style that they play, I feel like if it's not working, like you said, and like Big Ten Geeks pointed on Twitter, like if what they're doing, if you can adjust and you can handle that initial pressure and you can get the straight line layups, like there's no stopping. Like they're going to keep playing the way they're going to play. And if you can break that, you're going to beat them by 20 or 30. So yeah, there's such a high risk, high reward there, because obviously and I saw it firsthand with Ohio State last year where, I mean, they forced Ohio State. There's one sequence where they turned Ohio State over 3 straight times on the exact same like sequence. It was like they got the ball to roughly half court, and CJ Jackson like picked up his dribble and they swarmed him and he turned it over and it was a layup. And Illinois ends up winning that game. They can obviously very much, you know, pressure and get into another team, and if it works like it did at Ohio State last year, it's great. But if it doesn't work, then you almost look silly. So yeah, I wouldn't be comfortable putting them too high in the standings, but I mean, they're definitely going to make some things, you know, miserable for some teams for sure.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for the time. It is always a pleasure talking with you, not just about Ohio State, but Big Ten, because you know the conference inside and out about as well as anybody. So follow him at Adam Jardy on Twitter. We always really appreciate talking to you.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite parts of this preseason. I know we're getting closer and closer to the start of the season. We'll have some real things to talk about, but it's great to catch up with you guys.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Adam. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Adam.
For sure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. Remember to join me and my co-hosts for more IU basketball talk at assemblycall.com, and visit Alex over at insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana basketball. If you want to support Podcast on the Brink, here is the single best way to do it. Tell anyone you know who loves IU hoops about us and suggest that they subscribe. Podcast on the Brink can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Tell your social media followers, email your friends, text your family members. For weekly discussion about IU basketball, they need to be subscribed to Podcast on the Brink. We'll talk to you next time. Go Hoosiers.